your host, Michael Braithwaite.
Welcome, everyone, to the On the Way Home podcast. We have such a special podcast for you today. I'm kind of fan nerding out about our guest. Before we get to the guest, I should tell you, this podcast is brought to you by the good people at Blue Door. Blue Door is my organization. For 42 years, we've been crushing it, helping our most vulnerable, fighting for our most vulnerable, helping them find affordable housing, whether it's emergency housing or semi-independent housing, whether it's for the queer community where we've got specialized housing that's affordable, or for senior men, or for families, or for creating construction social enterprise. We do so many different things, and that's called Construct, by the way. Check us out at bluedoor.ca. Hats off and a shout out to my team of over 120 that are doing the hard work, the heavy lifting day in, day out. Listen, this podcast is full of people doing incredible, inspiring work, whether it's research or gathering data, or being disruptors and doing different projects that move the needle forward on affordable housing, or supporting people through homelessness. We have advocates, we have lived experts who have lived through it and now can tell us not, what you might do, but what you should do because they know it moving forward. Today's guest is Mitchell Cohen, and he is the CEO of Daniels Corp. Mitchell is widely known for his work in driving the revitalization of Regent Park. Quite often, in this sector, when we look for examples of how it should be done, how do you create complete communities? How do you mix housing and revitalize a community? And Regent Park is the gold stamp, right? It's the gold seal. That's what you say, let's do what they did in Regent Park. And understanding how that came about. And when Mitchell comes on, we talk about, he's just releasing a book that will come out as his podcast is released, called Rhythms of Change. And it talks about the revitalization of Regent Park. It talks about all the different people, community people, different people that made it happen. And we talk about during the podcast how part of why I wanted to write the book was to celebrate all those people in the community. And it's an incredible story. It has some of his backstory. Why the heck did a developer, why is he so passionate about creating these complete communities, about affordable housing and helping others? He talks about his roots at the YMCA, something we both share, and how he got into kind of social justice and how that has stuck with him moving forward. We talk about how did Regent Park even come about? And he talks about some of the key people in that. What were the biggest challenges? And there were many, because it spanned over 20 years, really. Turbulent times provincially with the government, locally with the government, economic crashes in 2008, and doing something differently where Daniels actually was not the original winner of the RFP process through Toronto Community Housing, right? And so something that many people might not know. And what were the keys to that success? How accessible he is as a CEO and leader, and which leads to great conversations, which leads to nothing for us without us, meaning he's incorporating the voices of people in the community in his community work. He talks about the artists and giving them a home and a place to show their artwork and involving them in housing. And again, another part of that complete community. It's an incredible conversation with an incredible man and leader that I admire a lot. We talk about why others aren't doing this, and he's talking about how so many lessons from Regent Park have been applied and have driven others to do the similar kind of work, and that we learn from this. We talk about the book, how it came about, what his hopes are for the book moving forward, and what's next for the incredible Mitchell Cohen. This is such a wonderful podcast from a wonderful man. I enjoyed it. It's a little longer, but it's worth the time, folks. Tune in. Let's go to that podcast right now. Mr. Mitchell Cohen, I have been waiting a long time to have you on this podcast done in our sector. So I'm so excited for you to be here. Thank you so much for making the time.
Great to be here. Thank you, Michael.
We ask everyone the same question, and I'm very curious to hear your reflection of this, and that is, what does home mean to you?
Home is a place where I can feel comfortable and safe and secure. And I'm very fortunate in my life that I've always been able to have a home. that can be a place of grounding, a place where I feel like I can feel good being at home, feel protected, feel from there I can grow and work out of home in the community, but always know I've got a safe and secure place to come back to. Now, Michael, not everybody has that benefit, that privilege. I see it as a privilege. I see so many people in the course of my work that just don't have that security of tenure, the security of knowing that they have a home that they can be in and feel good and feel safe, because that's the grounding. That's the place from which we can all really go forward and make a contribution to our communities. That's what home means to me.
I love that. I love the grounding piece. Absolutely. Now, many people know you as a legend in the development world and the social housing space, but it started from a different space. It didn't start from Daniels. That's not where you started from. And you have kind of a unique journey, which is chronicled in your new book, Rhythms of Change, Reflections on the Regent Park Revitalization. We're going to talk about that. But if you could share just some of your incredible journey into current work. I mean, you've written a whole book on it, so it's hard to hard to sum up a little bit. But just take us on a little bit of that journey as to what kind of brought you to where you are now.
Sure, thank you. I think the real important part of where the journey that led to where I am now started in Montreal, working for the YMCA. It was actually the very first job that I had after university. I understand we might have a connection in that you might have worked for YMCA at one point early in your career as well. At that moment in time, it's 1973, and the YMCA is doing work in communities across Montreal. And I just graduated from London School of Economics with a degree in social psychology, and it was time to find a job. It was time to get serious and look for what I was going to do. And I'm looking through the newspaper and I see this posting, YMCA seeks community development worker, and then the key thing, no experience required. That was it. With that kind of opening, I thought, okay, well, here's an opportunity. I have a couple of university degrees. I don't have job experience, but they're saying, hey, come on in and knock on the door. YMCA invited me into that door and gave me this exceptional opportunity to work in a very low income, very challenged neighborhood in Montreal, a neighborhood, in fact, very similar to Regent Park. Same vintage, built right after the war, 3-story brick walk-ups. We're familiar with them. They were built post-war across the country, in fact. This particular community was owned by a private landlord, and that landlord had decided that he was going to demolish or have everyone move out eventually, get them to move out, put all tenants on 30 days, month-to-month notice to vacate. So I was working in the community. We were doing great YMCA programs. We were doing programs with young people, with seniors. We even took kids out of the community that had never been out of the community into the park, into the wilderness, did wilderness camping, like remarkable experiences with people in this neighborhood. And then one day, I'm in my office, and about 40 or so tenants come marching into my office, like literally hysterical, because they've gotten their 30-day notice to vacate. That was a moment that changed my life, because the vulnerability, the anxiety, the uncertainty was so palpable. People didn't know what to do or how to react, other than to know that 30 days later they had to move out. And at that moment, Michael, in Montreal, the vacancy rate was less than 1%. There was nowhere to go. In particular, zero affordable housing for people to go. That was the moment that I realized, I kind of, recognized very clearly, I'm a worker for the YMCA, but much more than that, I have a responsibility to try to do something, to try to find an answer, to try to find a path forward with these tenants who are so threatened in terms of their day-to-day life, in terms of having a home, a home to feel secure in, a home to grow their family with certainty. So what happened is I had, by total happenstance, read in the newspaper that the federal government had established a new national program to support community groups like the group I was working with in this neighborhood to form nonprofit housing co-ops. And I remembered that. I saw that article and I thought, maybe this is a path forward. So I phone up CMHC. At that point, it was Central Mortgage and Housing Corporation. Now it's Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, of course. And I say, hey, tell me about this program. And they very, very quickly say, well, you're one of the first people who have called. If you write us a letter right now, I think we can get you what's called startup funding. So I wrote a letter on my little typewriter and I delivered it to CMHC's office. And the next morning, the group, through our letter that we had sent, were given $8,800 in startup funding in order to research whether they could and we could collectively find a way to set up a co-op, negotiate with the landlord, buy or lease the buildings, renovate the buildings that were in a terrible state of disrepair. The landlord had allowed those buildings to run down terribly because he wanted everybody out. So startup funding gave us the key to move forward, because with that one letter on CMHC letterhead, the federal government is saying, group, you have $8,800. We took that to City Hall and, well, with 300 people, marched on City Hall, in fact, and said, do not give the landlord his demolition permit. Allow us to research, to do some work, to talk to the landlord, to see if there's a way forward. So it took 3 years, but there was a way forward. And that co-op was established. I was able to work closely with the tenants, learned all about co-op housing, learned how to work with government, learned how to work with architects and engineers and do the restoration necessary. And the co-op still exists there today, many, many years later. That was the start of my trajectory, the start of my career, where I understood that I had a responsibility and that I could, if I applied everything that I could bring to the table, make an impact, make a difference in someone's life, find a way to create home, that sense that we started with, to find a way to work with people to generate for them, with them, a place where they could feel comfortable, safe, and secure. That was the start of it. And today it's many, many years later, 51 years later, in fact, I'm still doing the same work, which is to look at our business at Daniels today. I mean, it's been 40 years that I've been the president and CEO of Daniels, but to look at our business as a way, as a platform to try to use our business to create affordable homes for people. And we've done that in many, many ways over the last 40 years.
Yes, I would say so. And so glad, and for people to understand where you got your start from, because I think often people think people just come into the development world, and you're right. So it's funny you mentioned in your book Saul Kazmer, and I remember he was the CEO of YMCA Canada when I was involved with the Y, and so many people. It's interesting to get their start. I was voluntold to start at the Y. And my mom said, "You're not going to sit around all summer," and I volunteered at the Y and then I remember working there, thinking it was a great time. But like, people don't work here for a living, and then I did for a long, long time. So it was so cool to see that in your book that you had the YMCA start.
Saul was the guy who hired me. I mean, that's where it started.
The Y is such a small circle when I think of Saul and Franco Savoya and all these different kind of people that I saw, legends. I was really lucky, actually. I always say that I don't think any other organization would have let me fail as much as the Y did and learn from it. It was a great, great training spot, and I met many lifetime friends. Listen, I want to talk about Regent Park, because for many years on the other side of things, people would point to Jane and Finch or Regent Park, and the NIMBYism people would gravitate and say, look, this is what this is going to become. Look at those examples of. What you and all the community did with the revitalization of Regent Park is the opposite, where we now point and say, this is how it's done. Across Canada, outside of Canada, people point to the Regent Park redevelopment as, this is how you do it right. Right. So it's incredible. And thank you for that. It's kind of the gold standard. Can you take it and that didn't happen overnight, far from it. And again, we're going to talk about the book because you wrote a whole book around really that. Can you take us back to how it all started? How did you get involved? And we'll kind of go from there.
Sure. Well, at that moment in time, it's 2005, and the City of Toronto, through their housing agency, Toronto Community Housing, is beginning to look for a developer. And it was going to be the very first redevelopment of Toronto Community Housing portfolio, because what had happened is the provincial government had downloaded responsibility for all social housing to the municipalities. And they did that under the Mike Harris Common Sense Revolution, which we'll never forget. And now the City of Toronto has responsibility for 58,000 units of housing, social housing, pretty much all of which had been allowed to badly deteriorate. So buildings across the city in terrible shape, had not been properly maintained, had not had an investment, and they were literally falling apart. Toronto Community Housing was established when that downloading happened. They hired a CEO by the name of Derek Ballantyne. And Derek Ballantyne looked at the portfolio and said, what do we do with this? What can we possibly do to begin to transform a portfolio that is so big and so challenged? And he looked at the concept of revitalization, which really had begun to be discussed in Regent Park 10 years earlier, in the mid-1990s, where primarily women in the neighborhood came together and said, our units, our houses, our apartments are falling down. What can we do about it? And in the community, in Regent Park, this is what's so important about this story of Regent Park, the principles of revitalization began on the ground. This is bottom-up planning, as opposed to what has happened, generally across many, many American cities and some Canadian cities, which is a top-down approach to urban renewal, where a challenged inner city neighborhood is simply demolished. And tenants in that community have no voice. Tenants who are already marginalized, living in that inner city community, a community stigmatized as Regent Park was, would generally be pushed out even further to the margins. But here, the voice of those tenants in the mid-1990s carried through into that moment when Derek Ballantyne was beginning to look at the portfolio and say, what can we do? And what he understood is there's already a huge amount of groundwork that has been done on the ground in Regent Park by tenants. But he also understood the fundamental rule of real estate, which is actually the fundamental 3 rules of real estate. And I'm sure you know what they are. Location, location, and location, of course. Regent Park had that benefit, that opportunity. Truly a very short walk to downtown Toronto. Transit in many different directions, access to highways, schools. There were many things that were positive about where Regent Park was. So Derek chose Regent Park because of location, but also because the voice of tenants in that neighborhood had been loud and clear about what they referred to as the principles of revitalization. And Michael, most important of those principles was a right of return, where the tenants are saying, we'll move out to make way for a better, a new, a revitalized community, but we have to be guaranteed a right to move back. And the tenants presented that to Derek. It was part of their principles. And Derek said, yes, we will embrace right of return. We will embrace a transformation that creates a mixed income and mixed use community. The Regent Park that was so stigmatized over so many decades didn't have a bank, didn't have a grocery store, didn't have the amenities of most communities within Toronto, and so was also this island cut off from the rest of the city by virtue of how it was built in the 1940s and 50s as a garden city where the roads have been taken out. So you have this situation where there's a community deeply stigmatized, a community that many, many people in Toronto would say, oh my God, if you have to drive through Regent Park, don't stop. Roll up your windows, lock the door, don't stop. That's what I heard when I moved from Montreal to Toronto. I heard that loud and clear because I had to drive through Regent Park to get to my job at the Co-op Housing Federation of Toronto on the west side of town, and I lived on the east. So let's fast forward. You ask, how did we get involved? 2005, we began hearing that Toronto Community Housing, under Derek Ballantyne's leadership, was beginning to get the process kickstarted to find a development partner. So for me and my team, our team here at Daniels, it was, okay, this is in our wheelhouse. This is what we want to do as a company. You know, based on what I said earlier, we wanted and want to this minute to use our company as this platform to have business become this driver to ensure that we use every means possible to incorporate affordable housing in what we do. So when the Regent Park opportunity sort of began to be gestating, we said, we want to take this seriously. And what did that mean? For me, that meant my partner, Martin Blake, and I went into Regent Park, knocked on doors, met people, met every social service agency in the community well before the RFQ, request for qualifications, came out. We wanted to be prepared. We wanted to understand. We knew that the tenants living in Regent Park had this, anxiety about what was going to happen. Would TCH, Toronto Community Housing, respect the principle of right of return? Nobody knew. It was a principle. Would the concept of creating this mixed income, mixed use come to life? Nobody knew. Everybody felt the ground was shifting beneath them. And we went out in the neighborhood and we heard that loud and clear. So that experience we called Listen and Learn in the neighborhood. We spent months knocking on doors, meeting people, hanging out in the local parks. And we learned a lot. And there's two real critical things we learned when we then got ready to respond to the RFQ and then RFP. Number one, the voice of the tenants was critical. That we had to, in everything we did, respect and honor the voice of the tenants. Otherwise, there would be no chance whatsoever of success. We had to be working in total collaboration with the tenants, sharing a vision, sharing their vision of what they saw the new Regent Park could be. So that was number one. But the other thing that came from that Listen and Learn tour was that the only way this could work is that if we did it truly in a public-private partnership. It couldn't work any other way, at least for us. We weren't prepared to say in the response for proposals, we'll buy the land for condos, don't worry about it, we'll buy the land, we'll pay you so much money, we'll build the condos, you'll build the social housing, good luck to you, and we'll take care of ours. It could never work in that way. This was so complex, people's lives at stake in terms of moving out and knowing they could move back and having faith in the process. We knew that this had to be done through a partnership model, a true public-private partnership in which risk is shared and reward is shared. And that's the model that we put forward in our RFP response. And Michael, guess what? We didn't win. We lost. Because we didn't tick any of the boxes in the standard RFP protocol. We ignored them. We actually said the land is worth zero. We went further. We said the land is worth less than zero because it's contaminated. Because when Regent Park was built, it was built on the demolition materials of the old cabbage town that was demolished in the 1940s to make way. We had no idea what was underground and what the cost of cleaning up that land would be. So we said, this has to be done by partnership. We lost the bid because we didn't play by the rules. And we weren't disappointed when we lost because we kind of knew that we weren't playing by the rules. But 3 months later, we hear that the developer that they had reached an agreement with and actually entered an agreement, or sorry, at least announced the agreement, that discussion fell apart and the Toronto Community Housing was going back out to the short list of bidders, including us. That was exciting news. They came back out with the RFP, and Martin and I receive it, and we look at this document. It's the same 3-inch document with like an enormous number of boxes to tick and forms to fill out. And it was the exact same document. And I'm looking through this thing and I'm thinking, well, it's not going to work again. Until I get to the very last page of the document. I turn to the last page. There's a single paragraph. And that paragraph says, or proponents are able to submit an alternative development framework. Well, hallelujah, because that's what we had called our bid previously. So that opened the door to a true public-private partnership. We walked through that door. We entered a public-private partnership with Toronto Community Housing, and that is really what has allowed the evolution of the community in the way that we've seen it, the way we've been able to work with a public sector partner, Toronto Community Housing, and with residents and agencies in the neighborhood to accomplish what has been accomplished. We've been in it together. That has been key to the success thus far.
Well, I mean, I tell you, one word when you walk through Regent Park these days that screams out is dignity, right? Like such dignified housing mixed. It's incredible. It's community. It's not housing only. In reading the book, I was like the challenges that you went through just politically and the changes in political figures and leaders and Toronto Community Housing changing leaders a bunch of times. And how are we gonna pay for a community center that's not covered? And I mean, it's just so complex, but I was hoping you could touch on some of the bigger challenges, through the time that you worked through this.
Well, thank you for acknowledging the challenges because they were countless. One of the first ones that really whapped us on the side of the head was this thing in October of 2008 when the entire world economic order disintegrated. So we were under construction with the very first condominium in Regent Park, a building that we called One Coal. We're building it, and we're building it on spec. Not one unit is sold, because we convinced Derek Ballantyne and the board of Toronto Community Housing that we needed to build this first. We couldn't sell it from plans. We had to demonstrate that the revitalization was real, that there was going to be a grocery store in the base of this building. There was going to be a bank and a coffee shop, and that it was real. So that was for us fundamental to being able to go forward. So we're building this building, and it's being built on spec. We're pouring the 16th floor of the building, and literally the entire economic global order falls apart. Banks are failing around the world. And the Globe and Mail didn't help us on that occasion because they had this headline that came, a few days after the whole world. And it was basically saying, the promise of Regent Park is like gone. This will never happen. It's the end of the road for this idealized, revitalization because there's no economy. That hurt. But we had no choice. We had to keep pouring concrete. We had to keep trying to build the narrative of a community that is going to evolve over time and become a great place to live. And we did that. We kept telling the story. We had challenges along the way when our grocery store operator walked away, because again, that was part of the promise to the community. Having a grocery store in Regent Park was fundamental to the future of this whole thing, because Regent Park was a food desert. There was no place to buy food. There was nothing. People would have to go with their grocery carts all the way up Parliament Street to get to a No Frills, come all the way back down. There was no grocery store. And we're in the middle of doing this. We're pouring concrete. The World Economic Order disintegrates, and the grocery store operator tells us, well, despite the fact that we've signed an agreement with you, we made a mistake. We fired the people who signed the agreement with you, by the way. They're gone, and we're walking away from the agreement. And sorry, see you later. That was like a 1-2 punch where, what do we do? How do we claw back from this? What are our options? And so what we did is we did fight back with that particular grocery store operator. This is all public, so it was Sobeys. And we went to the Sobeys team and we said, you are not walking away. You must not walk away. You have a firm agreement with us to open a Sobeys brand store in Regent Park. And they again said, no, we're not. We're walking away. Sue us if you want to sue us. We went to a meeting, and this was like a game changer of a meeting where we brought a secret weapon to the meeting. We go out to Mississauga to their Ontario headquarters. This is John Fox, who was the lawyer at Toronto Community Housing at the time, the in-house lawyer. He's our partner in this endeavor. John and I go out to this meeting. We sit at an enormous boardroom table. There's lawyers, there's senior executives from Sobeys, and they're all very grim-faced because they know they're about to tell us that, like, take a walk, sue us if you want, it's over. And, we open with, well, you guys, you're not walking away. You have a commitment to this. You've committed to this. It's essential that you remain in this agreement. And they say, no, we're walking away. And then John pulls out the secret weapon, which was a tape recording of a senior executive from Sobeys stating at our groundbreaking ceremony, Sobeys Canada Corporation is here in Regent Park. We are proud to fly our flag here in this community. We are here for the long term, kind of like a thick and thin kind of thing. Well, the time was thin at that moment in time, but we held their feet to the fire. And the executives around the table, like, who were ready to walk away, all of a sudden, this is something we better rethink. Because we also showed them and had evidence of the millions of impressions of our marketing materials where we had this brilliant rendering of One Cole, a condominium, and at the bottom, this beautiful rendering with a Sobeys banner. And that was out there, and it was out there with their acknowledgement, with their agreement, because we had a firm agreement with them. So the entire world knows that Sobeys is coming. And now what? You're going to walk away? Well, we don't believe you can or should walk away. Sobeys came back to us and said, okay, we'll do it. But we'll do it under the banner of our other store. It's called Price Chopper. And John and I said, no, Price Chopper does not cut it. The agreement we have with you is for a Sobeys branded store. And that's what we want. We're working to change the dial on what Regent Park is. And a Price Chopper is not doing that. It's taking us backwards and not forwards. So we said, no, it's not acceptable. They went away and said, okay, we'll think about it again. 2 weeks before we launched One Cole, we're sitting in our boardroom in our partnership meeting. We don't know if Sobeys is walking. We don't know when we go to the market that we're going to be able to say there's going to be a grocery store or no grocery store. If there is, what brand it might be, we have no idea. Finally, the next day, Sobeys comes back to us and says, okay, we got it. We have a new brand. We're going to make a new brand, and trust us, but we can't tell you what the name of the brand is. Like, what do you mean you can't tell us? You have to tell us what the name of the brand is. They went away again. They came back the next day and they said, okay, the new brand is Freshco. We said, okay, we will accept that. Like, we're in the chute. We're ready to launch this thing. We want and need to have a grocery store. So we will accept that under one condition, that the name of the store for 10 years will be Freshco by Sobeys. And they agreed. Now, subsequently, over the months that followed, every Price Chopper in the country was rebranded as Freshco. But in the country, there was only one store that was Freshco by Sobeys. And that Sobeys sign, Freshco by Sobeys, stood there for 10 years. 10 years plus 1 day, the Sobeys team came and took the Sobeys part away. And it was Freshco. And today it's Freshco. And you know what, Michael? That was okay. Because 10 years into the process, so much had come together. So many other partners had come to the table, had joined this, multi-sector collaboration, which is just this huge composition of people and organizations and private sector, public sector, foundations that had come to the table, that at that moment it wasn't as important as it was on that first day to demonstrate that Sobeys, a national brand, was going to be in Regent Park. So that was a couple of the challenges along the way. There were others. Should I tell you more? Or
I think, listen, we're going to plug the book. And listen, I encourage everyone, because, you're just scratching the surface. I mean, a lot of people would have walked away. But, I mean, you talked about starting in the not so common sense revolution, the Ford years, and it goes on and on, right, for all the different things that happened. But I do want to say, I mean, it's very, very successful. I want to ask you, like, what are the keys? What were the keys to the success? I think you touched about, it's like that line where people say nothing for us without us, right? So it's community involvement is a huge key. But what are some of the other keys of its success? And why don't more people do this? Like, why isn't it done? If this is a great example, why isn't this repeated over and over and over again? Someone has, but not as much as it should be.
Well, the challenge with repeating it really has to do with land and ownership of land. I mean, the opportunity that Regent Park presented is that there was one owner. Toronto Community Housing owned 69 acres in the heart of downtown Toronto. Many, many other places, there's fractured ownership, and it's very hard to bring everybody together to create a unified vision and then stick to that vision and build it out. But I'm thrilled to say that people looking at what's happened in Regent Park are taking some of these lessons, which is the with lesson that you just referred to. Design with, build with, conceive with, envision with local residents. That was key, fundamental to where we have been and where we've come to. Local voices. And there is now a very much awareness in the development community, particularly in, call it public sector development, the City of Toronto, but also Waterfront Toronto, the Downsview development, where people, it's public sector pension fund is developing 550 acres in Downsview, are taking many of the lessons learned about working with community, listening to community voices, thinking about what we learned along the way. And it was a slow process of learning about intentional investment, social procurement, how to spend the money wisely that's going to lift up and create opportunities for people in a local community. And Regent Park, we were able to discover along the way the ways to do that. And they're not difficult. It's like you have to turn on this little light switch that says, I could buy art, and developers, buy art for every single building that they build. And where do they buy the art? Typically a interior designer is given the mandate and a budget, go buy art, put art into the hallways, put art into the community, room, etc. But it's really quite simple to say, buy art locally, engage with local artists, get to know the local artists in any given community, and give local artists the opportunity to have a platform. And then celebrate those local artists by projecting what they've done, to give them the ability to grow their practice as artists, to give them the ability to say, my work is shown in the lobby of this building or that building, and come take a look at it because I want to work with you to put art in your buildings or in your gallery. It's very hard for artists to find a place to show, to put on shows, to mount shows. It's expensive. Developers have this unique opportunity to spend that money that they're going to spend anyway with great intention. This really, again, as I was saying, came progressively. And one day a light switch went on for me when I met a woman walking down the street in Regent Park. I'm walking along Dundas, and what I do in the neighborhood and other neighborhoods we work in is say, hello, my name is Mitchell Cohen. I'm the CEO of Daniels Corporation. Tell me about, your life and your world. This one day I met a woman named Sakina Kanam. I have a conversation with Sakina on Dundas Street, and she tells me about the fact that her husband passed away recently, and she has no ability to bring income into the family. We talk a little bit more about what she does, what her hobbies are, what she used to do back home in Bangladesh. And she has this incredible skill as a quilt maker. And she has a group of women that get together socially and they make quilts. Well, that's where the light switch went on. That's where it's like, oh my God, Eureka, hallelujah. Sakina, what would you think if we commissioned a quilt for our next building? And Sakina's eyes light up and say, really? Would you do that? I think we have 12 quilts from Sakina and the Sewing Circle of Regent Park in buildings throughout our neighborhood in Regent Park. But we've taken that simple idea on the road to every one of our communities. And we talk to other developers all the time. Spend money with intention that you're going to spend anyway. Work to build up local economic opportunities, and that will come back in so many ways in terms of a healthy, vibrant community. So that is, some of the lessons that I wanted to share in Rhythms of Change.
Well, listen, you are such a passionate guy. In reading the book, I got to think some of that comes that whole heart of the community minded and looking out for each other. It stemmed from your mom and dad. You talk about being very community minded in the book. Who else? Like, what makes you tick? Because you are a little, you know what? I would go as far to say disruptor in the best of ways, right? Because you don't just say, that's how it is, we're going to roll that way. Even with, as you described, with RFQ, you were like, hey, we're going to do this our way. We won't do it because it doesn't make sense to us. What makes you tick that way? Why are you so passionate about this?
Well, I'm passionate about, again, using our business as leverage. And it's all about social justice. It's all about how I can make an impact through who I am, where I come from, my mom and dad, and their values. My dad was a physician that worked very deeply in the Indigenous community in Saskatchewan, working with people with drug addiction and alcoholism problems. And I saw his work, I saw his commitment and passion to supporting people, supporting community. A lot of that has flowed into me and is now flowing through me. But clearly what I understand is that I have the ability and responsibility, both, to do something. And if I can influence people on our team to also be inspired by using their energy and their creativity to think not outside the box. We often talk about it in our team. There's this thing about let's think outside the box. What we talk about is there is no box. Let's pretend for a moment there's no box. What can we do today and tomorrow to find new pathways to create affordable housing, new pathways to build economic security for people who can then feel like they have the ability to have a secure home, because they don't just have a job, which is really important, but ideally a career path, a long-term opportunity to bring income into the household, to have fulfillment from that, and to come back to that notion where we started, which is a sense of home, of security, because it's from there and that sense of being grounded that people can make a truly important contribution to their neighborhood and their cities.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. It's even more recent when we talk about encampments. A bunch of mayors, thankfully not the mayor of Toronto, have petitioned the premier of Ontario to use notwithstanding clause to kind of give them more powers to move people along in the terms of what the mayors have said. And when they say move them along,
Where
the answer is always where, right? Like where? If it's not home, then there is no along, right? Moving forward, and you've, been a catalyst to creating that home for so many, and it's so incredible. Now let's talk about your book. I have to tell you, Matt, like it's not just the book itself or the content, but how you did it. Like you create all you have all your loves in there. You have music. You talk about your backstory. You talk about the revitalization. But a huge part of the book also is about all the people involved. It's not a Mitchell Cohen production. This is all these different people. And I have to tell you, I saw people in there. Anishinaabe, who
yeah,
is the wife of my friend. And I mean, she's incredible. I had no idea she was involved. John Fox, who's a friend of the a huge friend of this podcast. We have him on quite often. He's an incredible guy. You hear that story, and I'm not surprised about John and just all the different people. You do so much, and now you're an author. Can you tell us just like how did the book idea come along, and how did you decide to put it together in the way that it's put together, which is incredible?
well, I really appreciate those very nice comments about the book. Thank you. Um, I had been thinking for quite a few years that what we were doing was important to chronicle. And they were stories and ideas about stories or ideas about how to talk about the work we were doing. But I didn't sit down to write it until a year and a bit ago, summer of 2023. And the reason was that we were so engaged in the process. We were so busy in the process. We were so busy creating that it was hard to sort of step back from that and begin to think about how to chronicle it or tell the stories. But a couple things happened. I mean, as you probably know, we didn't win the bid for the last two phases of Regent Park. So we were able to begin to see that there would be a natural ending to our role at the end of three phases out of five. Obviously, we were very disappointed about that, but that was the reality. So that was one thing that I began to see, that there was a natural ending to our ability to continue to be creating the new buildings in phases 4 and 5 and continuing to build community in the same way. So that was one thing that was weighing on me. But then in the summer of 2023, there was an article in the Toronto Star, and it was a phenomenal article. It was brilliant. It was really celebrating things that we had been doing in collaboration with the community. It was celebrating the Living Lane, where we have 4 artists that live in Live Works unit studios in Regent Park, in one of the buildings that we've created on this Living Lane thing, which is a phenomenal place. We created the Living Lane in collaboration with Black North Initiative, and there's 4 amazing artists that live there. We were celebrating the Living Lane last summer, and this article comes out, and it talks about local entrepreneurship. It talks about some of the people who we've been working with for years, who are establishing their own companies. And it was a celebration of some of the things that we have collectively, with the local entrepreneurs, with the Black artists from Black North Initiative. And the headline on the article is what really triggered this whole thing. Seriously. The headline was, "What Happened to Regent Park?" And I saw that headline and I read the article. The article was great. It really did tell some really positive stories. But the question, what happened to Regent Park? I just felt that triggered something for me, which is there's a lot of different stories, a lot of different perspectives about what has happened. There's lots that has been written about Regent Park, academic treatises. There has been all kinds of things, all kinds of opinions. We've been in the middle of it. I've been in the middle of it. So it really triggered for me that, again, I had to tell the stories through my perspective. Others will have their own vision, their own view, their own way to interpret what's happened, what's good, what's not good, what could be done better, what have we learned. But I just felt, to answer that question, my voice it was important to be one of the voices to answer what happened to Regent Park. That's what I've tried to do.
And you've done a great job of it. I mean, just also too highlighting all the different people involved. You know, it'll be stories, and then it will highlight someone. Then go to a story, and you incorporate your love for music in there. Yeah, it's just incredible. And for me, both being in the sector, and many of our listeners are in the sector, but also knowing the politics of Toronto and Ontario for the last 20 years was fascinating to learn how. Listen, like folks who are developing, you know, this was not a complex project done under, you know, the best of times. There was huge ups and downs, and still it prevailed. It's a gorgeous community, and it is the example that people point to. So, what are your hopes? You've written the book, and it's going to be a huge success. What are your hopes for the book now that it's done?
Well, partly, I wanted to write the book, to celebrate those people. It was really important for me. These are the people on the ground who did the work, you know, who developed the vision originally in the 1990s and right through the course of the revitalization. Also to celebrate the people who made the very brave decision to move in, to buy a condo or to rent a unit in Regent Park, coming from outside. And I wanted to celebrate all of those people. So that was another purpose in writing the book. What do I hope will come from it? I hope that people reading this book will recognize that they have the power, the potential, the ability to make a difference in their neighborhood, in their community. Like the residents of Regent Park, you know, took a stand and said, this is what needs to be done. These are the principles. These are our values. I'm hoping the people who read the book will spark that same kind of feeling. I have something to say, and I have the personal ability and power in my neighborhood to mobilize, to become an agent of change, to actually move things forward, to create a community in which everyone is welcome, a community where everybody belongs, a community in which everyone is able to feel at home.
Very well said. You know, and I'll tell you this too, Mitchell, in talking with Anishinaabe, who that was, I think, her first job coming out of school was working for Toronto Community Housing with John Fox on this. And she just said, you know, as a young person coming into this, she couldn't believe how accessible you were as Daniel's CEO, as someone who's a very busy person with multiple. She said, the most accessible CEO I've ever seen. And you talked about that, stopping and having conversations with people on the street. And I think that accessibility has led to probably some of the greatest learnings, right? I mean, that's it made a lot of sense to me when she said that in reading the book. I so appreciate it. If people want to get this book and read it, where can they get it?
The book will be out on November 12th, and it will be available in bookstores, Indigo, Spacing Store, any bookstore in the city will have it. It's also available for ordering through Amazon, through Indigo. So very simple, Rhythms of Change at Amazon, Rhythms of Change at Indigo. It'll come up and you'll be able to order it or walk into an Indigo store or any of the other booksellers in the city. You know, we've been working very closely with Spacing Magazine. They've been a phenomenal partner in this, and it will be available at the Spacing store at 401 Richmond, which celebrates, you know, all kinds of, you know, stories and, you know, what's happening in terms of urban planning and city building. So Spacing is one place that it can be picked up, but any number of places, and it's wonderful. Thank you for plugging the book like that. We appreciate that, Michael.
No, I mean, listen, I don't know if I've ever gone through a book that quick. I mean, it was just fascinating. Now I'm a bit of a nerd for this kind of stuff, but it's fascinating, all the different people and all the different obstacles and the success of it. So this is a huge accomplishment, as you've had many throughout your life. What's next for Mitchell Cohen? Where do you go from here?
Well, we have lots on our plate as a company. I mean, right now in particular, Michael, this is a moment when there is a tremendous opportunity to create affordable housing. And that hasn't been true over the last number of decades. But I'm feeling that there is this alignment. Everybody finally is talking about the crisis in affordability. Finally, every level of government acknowledges this is a number one political issue. It's always been an issue, and an issue that is hugely challenging. But today, governments are finally recognizing that it is risen up there to the point where it is significant politically for them. What I hope that will mean is that it'll translate into actual dollars. Because creating affordable housing, there's no mystery. And you're engaged in this, you know what it takes to create a unit of affordable housing. There's a cost to create any unit of housing. But to make that unit affordable, there needs to be inputs of capital. Where does that input come from? It needs to come primarily from government. And all the different levels of government have a role to play. Municipalities have the tools. They can waive development charges. They can waive property taxes. The province, unfortunately, has been missing in action with respect to the creation of new affordable housing. But I think politically, today that will be different. And tomorrow that will be different. Federal government has had a number of programs over the last number of years since 2017. Hallelujah, the federal government has said that housing is a right for all Canadians. But now the programs that I hope they will support will be programs that will address those issues around homelessness, around supportive housing, create new opportunities for transitional housing where a person has a home, has a key to a front door, to a place where they can feel secure. So there is money in the system, and government is saying affordable housing is important. Now's the time to harness that into programs that work. We've worked with affordable rental, affordable ownership. The models exist. There's no mystery. Affordable housing, it's a math problem. It's not like, what do we do? Well, we all know what to do. You know what to do. It takes money. There's another aspect to this, though. The final one, I think, is that finally, I also believe the philanthropic community is beginning to understand that housing is so important because housing, safe, secure, affordable housing, is a social determinant of health. If we can create housing, especially supportive housing, transitional housing, we will reduce the cost of healthcare. Oh my God, what a revelation. It's not. We all know that. So ideally, contributions and philanthropic contribution to hospitals, to research is all good and all very important. But taking some of that philanthropy to create homes today will reduce the health care costs tomorrow. So that's a big mission for me and for us, is to work to bring philanthropy to the table, to bring foundations that are private family foundations, but also corporate foundations, to have the banks say, we're actually going to do something about affordable housing as opposed to talk about affordable housing. And sorry, but I've had lots of conversations with banks about making investments, and so far we haven't seen it. But their foundations have this opportunity to make contributions. And corporations across the board have that opportunity. That's going to be a major part of what I do going forward. Finding pathways, finding the money that will support those pathways so that we can create homes here in Toronto, across the country, that truly will be affordable and remain affordable in perpetuity. There have been some false starts under the federal programs where they supported programs that would have 10 years of affordability. That doesn't cut it. We know what needs to happen. We know it costs money, a lot of money. But it's focusing that investment in a way and thinking of it as an investment. It's an investment to the future of our country. And I'm very hopeful that government will see that now, will respond to the crisis in affordability that we're all facing.
Well said. And I think, with the work that you do and the work that so many others do, we have to continue to make it almost unignorable, to steal a line from the United Way, where you just can't ignore the success and the fact that the data is out there, as you said, around the investment, that our GDP is actually a lot better when people have affordable housing. Neil Hetherington from Daily Bread often says, we don't need more food. The food is the Band-Aid. What we need is affordable housing so people can then afford the food to put in their fridge, right? So much moving forward. Well, listen, Mitchell, it has been an honor of a lifetime to have you on the podcast. So many learnings. I encourage all listeners, pick up a copy of the book, read the story. For me, what it does as we look forward and we see all these obstacles is inspired me to do more, to think differently, to see how I could do something like that in the communities that I work. And I'm sure you'll feel the same. Mitchell, thanks so much for your time today. And I look forward to seeing what you do in the future.
Thank you very much, Mike. Bye-bye.